Okay. And with that, Cease to Know is here, Mob is here. The topic is More Realism is True. We can get straight into it. The format is going to be.
Oh, you guys. So they want an extra minute for each opening.
They want next minute.
So
What?
so they get 8 minutes each. The affirmative is Cease to Know, and mitigation is Mob. So Cease to Know goes first.
Okay. Cease to Know, you're going to get an 8-minute opening statement. And it starts when, let me see, let me get the timer. Whenever you say your first word.
Can you guys hear me okay, first of all?
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right, great. So thank you for having me back on your debate platform, first of all, and thank you for letting me be a part of this tournament. It's always a pleasure. The topic tonight is whether or not more realism is true, and I will be defending the affirmative that it is indeed true. So let's clarify terms. In philosophy, there are normative theories about which actions are judged as right and wrong, and then there are meta-ethical theories about the nature of moral claims, and tonight we'll be examining meta-ethics. There are two main meta-ethical theories with further subcategories that stem from the first two, moral realism and moral anti-realism. Moral realism is the view that moral claims report facts about the world that are independent of human beliefs, opinions, and cultures. A moral realist believes that moral language is truth-apt, and that moral statements can be either true or false. A moral realist, for example, would argue that the statement "rape is wrong" is a universally true statement, regardless of personal opinion or cultural agreement. A moral anti-realist is instead going to reduce moral claims to nothing more than personal stances, cultures, and beliefs, without any real notion of universality to the concepts. A moral anti-realist would therefore ultimately be forced to say that the statement "rape is wrong" is not universally true. In fact, in my view, moral questions as not having any kind of truth value to begin with. Now, I will break down my specific kind of moral realist view because it's a little bit different. My position is a moral realist position, but one that combines moral realism with mind dependence. My view remains independent of cultures, opinions, and mere stances, but the dependence lies with the nature of the mind itself. I call this the phenomenology of morality. My claim here is that consciousness itself has a nature. It's one that we can discover and learn things about. Morality is the project of discovering the kinds of actions that will lead to harm reduction. While moral subjectivity is referring to the difference in stances, phenomenological subjectivity is addressing something different. It's examining the fact that although we're different people having subjective experiences, there are shared universals and patterns that emerge across the board. Husserl, Merleau-Ponty, Heidegger, Simone de Beauvoir all contributed to the field of phenomenology in different ways, and I'm simply continuing the tradition in a context of morality. If I look at a glass on a table, and you look at a glass on a table, we're two different people having the subjective experience of looking at a glass on a table, but we can communicate and understand each other about what it's like to look at a glass on a table in a way that shows a shared nature of that experience. These states of being are not merely opinions or cultural customs. They are what we experience within our consciousness in relation to the world. The same applies in the moral sphere from this point of view. In that context, it's possible to value the wrong thing in the sense that a person might think an action will lead them to flourish and instead be led to suffer. Here's an analogy to the relationship between stances and facts to further illustrate my view. Imagine somebody wants to become a bodybuilder, yet for whatever strange reason they hold to, the belief that to achieve this goal, all they need to do is eat McDonald's every day and lay on the couch. Their belief is going to fail to correspond to reality. It will fail to correspond to existing facts of nutrition. Regardless of their stance, they'll fail to achieve that goal if they were to follow the strategy. My claim is that the same applies to the moral sphere. When we're talking about morality, we're really talking about actions that lead to harm reduction. This is not subjective in the moral anti-realist sense, but rather grounded in universal phenomenology, the nature of experience, in a more realist sense. Now, let's discuss the concept of oughts. Hume famously once said that you cannot derive an ought from an is, but this is simply to be confused about how language is being used here. Of course, just because something exists in nature, it doesn't mean it's moral. My view is not that it's moral because it's natural. My view is that there are inherently detrimental experiences and one that are inherently fulfilling, And this is simply the state of affairs we're describing when using moral language about which actions will lead to either state. My point here is that oughts are always concerned with goals. If my goal is to not feel hungry, then I ought to eat. If my goal is to find a job, I should apply for jobs. If my goal is to become physically strong, I ought to work out. If my goal is to be moral, then I ought to diminish unnecessary suffering. Now, the anti-realist wants to claim that this goal is arbitrary, that it is stance-dependent. My claim is that this is illusory. The goal isn't arbitrary. It emerges from observable facts about the nature of our experience that exists prior to the language and prior to the mere stance. The stances are secondary at best. The same way that if someone chose to drink poison, you couldn't call them healthy because the idea of health refers to a specific category of concepts. The same applies to the moral sphere when it comes to somebody engaging in harmful behavior. In other words, there are moral oughts and potentially non-moral oughts, but in both cases, they're going to refer to facts about the kinds of strategies necessary to achieve those goals. Let's address one other issue. Moral realists are often accused of smuggling in their own personal stance when saying that well-being is good. But this is just begging the question against my view. To ask if well-being is good in my worldview is no different than asking if heat is hot. It's just what the label is referring to. The point here is that the phenomena is prior to the language, and then it is categorized by language in a secondary way. We use language to categorize things in the world, objects, experiences. I'm saying that words like good and bad are doing the same, just in a different context. The point here is that normativity is not independent of facts. Anti-realist positions tend to align with logical positivism, a view which declined in credibility when its core principles were shown to be deeply flawed and ultimately untenable. Hilary Putnam saw the fact-value dichotomy as the most damaging aspect of logical positivism, negatively impacting philosophy and social sciences, particularly economics. To be clear, I'm not claiming that all suffering is bad. Some suffering can even lead to greater good, like working out puts my body through a kind of suffering, but for positive results. Obviously, this is a different type of suffering than the experience of trauma or PTSD or that kind of harm. For the anti-realists to defeat my view, they would have to undermine my theory of morals, and to do this, they would have to somehow reject a century of evidence in psychology, neuroscience, and phenomenology that shows that there are shared and universal patterns to the experience of conscious beings from which values are constructed that exist prior to senses, prior to cultures, and mere beliefs. Simply defining terms differently than me wouldn't be a defeater to my own worldview. Furthermore, we think of science as an academic field independent of bias and values, but this is not the case. To use logic, to use a scientific method, the very structure of science is based on the values we hold in regards to it. Everything about science, as well as everything else, by the way, is also experienced through the phenomenological subjectivity I discussed earlier. This is not a problem, because in reality, subjectivity and values are not in conflict with objectivity and universality and facts. They are in relation to each other. Now, there are a few more common rebuttals that I've heard against my view that I believe ultimately fail for a number of different reasons. If my opponent brings these up, I'll be prepared and respond accordingly. If there are any objections that he does not address, I'll be more than happy to examine them in my closing statement. How much time do I have left?
That's it. That was the last second.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
Okay, great. All right, so now it's Mob's opener, and Mob, you can, whenever you start. Oh, you can start when we start. Whenever you say your first word, go ahead.
All right, that was very good. Oh, wait, can you give me 1 second?
Okay.
Yeah, we can do that. While we're waiting, everybody remember to like and share the live, tap those screens. Let's try to see if we can get it to 20K. Thank you guys so much.
Okay.
Okay.
So, first off, I'd like to thank Coco and AR for hosting this debate and the judges for agreeing to judge. This debate will be interesting for me because I really have no dog in the fight. I'm not committed to any meta-ethical view in reality. And frankly, I didn't even know much about this topic a week ago. And Cease is also my friend and a very intelligent person, so whatever the outcome is, I'm okay with it. That being said, let's get into the substance. The SCP defines moral objectivism as a thesis consisting of this conjunct. Moral statements are truth-apt, moral success theory is true, and moral facts are true independent of stances. Now, since Cease has to affirm all three propositions, and I only have to negate one of these, there's only one way Cease can be correct, yet 7 ways I can be correct. This makes my hypothesis initially more likely than Cease's. So just like that, right off the bat, I'm already winning this debate. For Cease to catch up, he's going to have to show that my priors are incorrect. How can he can do this by showing the impossibility of some of the options being negated in the conjunct that were once thought to be possible to me, or by showing that his theory is more likely consequently by comparing theoretical virtues with my hypotheses. Cease's view assumes the falsity of a number of widely held, respected positions in academia, such as non-cognitivist views like emotivism and quasi-realism, moral relativist views like constructivism and appraiser relativism, and even views like error theory. Thus, he must demonstrate their falsity. I'd love to see him try. That is a big burden. But I won't stop there. I will now be offering a few arguments against moral objectivism. My first argument is from Hume, the is-ought gap, targeting moral naturalism like Cease's phenomenological view. Premise 1, if Cease's view is true, then moral oughts are derived from descriptive statements about the world. Premise 2, it is not the case that moral oughts are derived from descriptive statements about the world. Conclusion, Cease's view is false. Now, there are 2 possible moves Cease can make here. He can say ought statements are not derived, but they are brute, which denies P1, or the move I predict Cease will do, he will deny that the is-ought problem is a problem at all, and claim something akin to moral ought statements being identical to the natural facts. Now, I think there are huge problems with both approaches. The former commits you to a ton of brute facts and ruins the theory's parsimony, as well as raises questions of our epistemic access to these facts. The second commits Cease to analytic moral naturalism, which results in an option in Lance Bush's famous trichotomy that Cease's view is just trivially true. It's uninformative. Pleasure is good is just saying pleasure is pleasure. Is saying there's some natural fact X that is good really like saying there is some natural fact X? It doesn't seem that clear. Which actually brings me to my next argument, Moore's open question argument. Premise 1, if good were analytically equivalent to some natural property N, like pleasure or desire satisfaction, then the question is N good would be trivial, closed, or meaningless. For any natural property, premise 2, for any natural property N, the question is N good remains open, substantive, and non-trivial. Premise 3, therefore good is not analytically equivalent to any natural property. Premise 4, if good is not analytically equivalent to any natural property, then moral naturalism is false. Conclusion, moral naturalism is false. Like the analytic version, sorry. If Cease wants to say that what's good is identical to some natural thing or to some descriptive thing, then the question is N good would be closed. Clearly, it's open and up for debate. Now, Cease might counter this by saying I'm confusing epistemology with metaphysics. That just because the question seems to be open in epistemic sense doesn't mean that N and good are not identical on a metaphysical level. However, this is a common mistake many people make. I think the fact that it is open epistemically means that the debate has not fully been solved, and this gives us reason for us to not commit to this analytic view. Another problem with moral realism has been raised by Mackey and others as well. Mackey says that we shouldn't believe in queer things, and well, Ceasetoknow is queer, so we shouldn't believe anything he says. I'm just joking. Jokes aside, though, Mackey's argument goes like this. Premise 1, first-hand knowledge of moral facts are morally motivating, right? They motivate us to act in accordance with the facts. Premise 2, false beliefs are not morally motivating to act in accordance with the believed moral facts. Premise 3, if first-hand knowledge of moral facts are morally motivating and false beliefs, moral beliefs are not, then moral motivation stems from the motivational pull of moral facts exerted on the human psyche. Hence, premise 4, hence, moral motivation stems from the motivational pull of moral facts exerted on the human psyche. Premise 5, any fact that exerts motivational pull on the human psyche are queer facts. Conclusion, hence, moral facts are queer facts. Now, you might be thinking, what is meant by queer here? What I mean is that they have a relation or property that is very odd, unlike anything else in the world. Like knowing that water boils at 100 degrees Celsius is not going to motivate someone to act. That fact doesn't have some sort of gravitational pull associated with it. It doesn't intrinsically motivate anyone. Yet moral facts seem to have this behavior. Motivation seems to be a common problem with moral realist views. Moral facts are supposed to be motivating. They motivate us to act. That is one of the things a meta-ethical theory is meant to explain. What would it even mean to be motivated to act without some sort of stance or desire involved? Can Cease make sense of this? And this actually brings me to my next argument. And this is from something I heard from Kane B, the moral fact detector argument. So premise 1, if moral facts are intrinsically necessarily motivating, then anyone who knows an objective moral fact would be motivated to act in accordance with it. Premise 2, it is possible to know an objective moral fact that is radically counterintuitive or disgusting, like eating poop. Premise 3, humans are not motivated to act in accordance with such counterintuitive objective moral facts. In fact, we would feel repulsion and likely act contrary to them. So the conclusion is that, therefore, moral facts are not intrinsically necessarily motivating. Objective moral facts, sorry. Now, what is this motivation to accept this argument? Well, imagine I had a moral fact, magic 8-ball, and I asked the 8-ball if it's good to eat poop and toenails, and it said yes. Would you be motivated to eat poop and toenails? Of course not. Moral realism sort of misses the point of moral conversation. It actually does a terrible job at explaining moral discourse and language use, which according to the SCP is another thing that a good moral theory should be able to explain. As an abductive argument, moral realism lacks explanatory power in this case, and thus it is a bad theory. And one final argument is from Sharon Street. And it goes like this. Premise 1. If evolution selects for beliefs that aid survival, and the beliefs shaped by evolution are not aimed at moral truths, then our faculties are unlikely to track moral facts. Premise 2. Evolution selects for beliefs that aid survival, and the beliefs shaped by evolution are not aimed at moral truths. Conclusion, our faculties are unlikely to track moral facts. I use moral facts here in the objective sense, of course, so Cease's view is self-defeating since he can't claim to know what the objective moral facts are, or that there are any at all. So, I got 1 minute. Okay. All in all, I've challenged several different moral realist views in several different ways. Non-naturalist views struggle with epistemic problems of how we know the facts, queerness problems, metaphysical inflation problems, motivation problems, and the evolutionary debunking argument problem, and just a simple lack of evidence problem. And naturalist views struggle from the Azot problem, openness problem, normativity problems, also queerness problems, and motivation problems as well. That being said, I'm excited to hear Cease's responses, so let's get into it.
Okay. Thank you guys for your opening statement. Now we're going to move into the 5-minute cross-examinations. So Ceasetoknow, you're going to get 5 minutes to ask questions to establish a position or delegitimize your opponent's position. And it will start whenever you say your first word.
Yeah, I want to say a few things as far as what I caught, because you were going very fast there. You might want to repeat some of the premises there. But a few things you said that I think are self-defeating. The first thing you said was that my approach is using moral language in a way that's counterintuitive or not the way it's usually used. But I would actually say that about your position, right? That actually, if non-moral realism was true, then moral disagreement would be nothing more than just a difference in taste. Right? It would be no difference in somebody having taste in chocolate as opposed to vanilla, right? But this is not how moral propositions are treated. So I actually think the opposite to what you said is true. You also mentioned something about...
Wait, can I respond to that, or do you want to echo?
You can. I mean, well, let me put a few things there. Well, yeah, let me put a few things there.
Go ahead. It's your cross. You take on.
You also said that you mentioned not knowing epistemically what will lead to well-being or suffering. But this is a different question, right? I'm not claiming that my worldview has the answer to every moral question. What I'm claiming is that there clearly are moral answers to these questions, and that if you want to call it trivial, it's no more trivial than how we describe other phenomena in reality. It doesn't mean that it's only informative, because I am providing information as to what I mean by harm reduction, what I mean by well-being, how these notions emerge from, and how they're talked about in society. So the idea that it's not informative is just completely not the case. You also talked about pleasure and pain, but when I'm talking about harm reduction and flourishing, I'm not talking merely about pleasure and pain. In fact, I made distinctions there between the kind of suffering that could even lead to a greater state of well-being versus the kind of harm like PTSD or trauma that we clearly recognize are inherently negative states of being. Now, I want to point to one thing to the judges listening, that without knowing it, Mob actually conceded to what I was saying earlier about values, right? Because he's talking about epistemic virtues, right? Well, already there, you are acknowledging that in your very philosophy, you're engaging in values, right? You're engaging in a space where you're valuing certain notions over other ones, right? And if what you're saying is true, then I would have no reason to care about one value over another. No even on a logical perspective, outside of moral sphere, if values are divorced from facts in the way that the anti-realist wants to say, then anything becomes anything. We have no reason to even engage in the philosophical sphere if that was the case. I'm saying clearly that is not the case. So yeah, if you want to respond to any of these. You can.
Damn, you said a lot there. I guess for the last part, I don't think they're divorced from facts. I think the descriptive facts play a role, but ultimately it comes down to our desires. I don't know what it would mean to just have a bunch of descriptive facts and somehow that's motivating. There needs to be some sort of desire link. And that actually like is a good segue into your first part of how we use moral language. Oftentimes when we engage in debates, you see a lot of these on TikTok. What do? We run reductios and we use intuitions and stuff like that. We sort of run it as like an internal critique. We do appeal to facts about the world, but rarely do we, or I don't know if we actually ever do so without appealing to some sort of desire about the situation as well. And that's what my moral fact detector thing was supposed to point out. Like, if you found out it was objectively true that you should eat poop, would you do it?
If what? If it was what true? Say the last part again?
If you found out it was objectively true that you should eat poop.
Well, I don't know what it would mean for something like that to be objectively true. Like, what? That doesn't even sound like a proposition.
Objective fact. I don't know. It does in some realist sense. It could be any sense. There's a moral, or there's some platonic object of the sort, something. In any sense.
I'm not trying to be difficult, but that question seems incoherent to me. You're not expressing a proposition, and when you and just to be clear, I'm not divorcing the idea of desires from the conversation. What I'm saying is that desires are not mere stances, right? But they have an origin that is not arbitrary the way that a mere stance would be, but rather emerges from the phenomenology I talked about. Meaning that somebody might desire the wrong thing in virtue of not having enough information to know what they ought to desire in relation to the potential capacity of these experiences. That if they knew what it was like to have one experience as opposed to another, then they would desire that other experience.
Then they wouldn't desire, exactly. But what are desires, though? Desires are desires stance independent?
No, I'm not saying that the desire is. I think the stance is secondary.
All right, okay.
Yeah, that's time for the
This is fun. I'm liking this. Okay.
cross-examination. All right, Coco, take over.
With that, we're going to go on to Mob's 5-minute cross-examination. And yeah, this is your time to legitimize or delegitimize your opponent, ask questions, or talk. You get 5 minutes, and it starts whenever you say your first word. You ready to go? You're muted.
Sorry. Okay, I'm ready. So my first question is you've debated on Coco's channel numerous times, and you're undefeated. So my first question is, how does it feel to be in the midst of your first loss?
Well,
Okay.
I don't feel that way yet. But
I reclaim my time. Okay, second question. And do you have... Well, okay, actually, let me ask you this first. Do you accept that the initial likelihood of you being wrong is higher than me being right?
No, I don't, because I think that my view is actually simpler in relation to how concepts of morality and moral language are already used.
Like the prior, not when considering the facts and comparing all of these virtues. The initial likelihood, when you're looking at the sample space initially, I have more ways I can be right than you, right?
I'm not convinced by that, because there are as many more realist views as there are more anti-realist views. So I actually think, if anything, if I'm being charitable, I think we're even. I don't think that mine are more unlikely. I don't think you have more ways that could be wrong.
Because you have to affirm 3 propositions at once, right? I only have to negate 1.
And what are these 3 propositions?
For each one I negate, there's like tons of views associated with it.
And what are these 3 propositions you're saying?
Yeah, that moral statements are truth-apt, that moral success theory is true, which means at least some moral facts are true. There are some moral facts. And that they're true stance independently. Like, you have to accept all 3 of those, right? I only have to negate at least 1.
Well, potentially. I'm not convinced that I would have to accept all 3, but I'm fine with it.
That's what moral objectivism is.
Well, I think there are different variations of it, but
No,
I don't think necessarily my view. Well, I guess what I would say is this: is that if the opposite of my view was true, then you would have to take on the opposite propositions, which would be as many. But I'm fine with what you're saying there.
Okay, you're fine with what I'm saying, so you do agree. So you agree that you're already losing.
No, I don't. No, at all.
See, guys, judges, crowd, I just want you to see how stubborn this man is right here. Okay.
I think you're just confused about what you're saying there.
Okay.
Because you don't understand that if moral realism is false, then moral anti-realism would be true, and for that position to be defended, it would require the opposite claims and arguments to be true, right? So it would, ultimately, the views end up with the same amount of propositions.
Wait, sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah. So if moral realism is false, then moral anti-realism would have to be true. I assume it's a dichotomy, and if that's the case, then you would have to show how your position would have to be true, and that will lead to its own set of propositions that you would have to defend.
Yeah, but moral realism, anti-realism encompasses a number of views. There's subjectivist views, there's error theorist views, there's non-cognitive.
Right. There is more. I think there are more ways in which your perspective can be wrong than mine in that context.
No, there's more ways it can be right. I'm taking the disjunct of all moral realist views.
No, I understand. I think we'll have to agree to disagree.
Okay. Do you have a formal argument for moral realism?
A formal argument?
Yeah, like with premises and inference.
No, I didn't think that.
Okay, you don't. Okay. Can you give me an example of something motivating you to act absent of desires or stances?
Yeah, I think my phenomenology leads to the stance and the desire. Actually,
No.
let me take a step back real quick to one question you had.
Wait, hold on. I reclaim my time.
Sure, that's fine. I would say if I had to.
Wait.
Okay.
Okay. So your phenomenology leads to certain stances. That's fine. I think certain facts about the world can lead to me having certain stances, but ultimately the motivation is not divorced from the stances. Can you give me an example of motivation being divorced from stances entirely?
No, and that's not my view. I'm not claiming that the motivation is divorced from stances. My view is that both the stances and the motivations emerge from a domain that is reducible to facts and is statements, that the phenomenology is prior to the desire and the stance, and that it's possible for somebody to have the wrong stance in virtue of not recognizing those facts about the phenomenology. So I think you're misunderstanding what I'm saying here.
Well, I think like a subjectivist view can explain all of the sort of moral facts that your view has, and then you have this sort of extra facts that are unnecessary because stances are required in every single time as a moral fact in your view. Okay, time's up.
I guess it's up to you guys. Do you want Ceasetoknow the answers to that, and then we move on to the next one, or do we just want to move on?
Well, I would like to answer the two questions he asked there.
You okay with that?
Sorry?
Mob, are you okay with that? And then we'll start Ceasetoknow's time after he finishes answering.
No, you can take that from his time.
Oh, okay. So with that, we're going to move on to the second round of cross-examination. That concludes the first round. Thank you guys for your candor. Ceasetoknow, you're going to get 5 minutes on the clock, and it will start whenever you say your first word.
Sure. So my view is that the dichotomy between subjective and objective is illusory from the phenomenological perspective. Do you agree or disagree that everything we learn about the physical world through science is also experienced subjectively?
Experienced subjectively. Yeah. Yeah, okay. So I just want to, like, that language is weird. Like, I'm using subjective very clearly. I'm using it as, like, the truth maker of a proposition is our stances. So experience subjectively. Like, yeah, we have a subjective experience. I just want to make sure we're not conflating terms, but go ahead.
No, what I'm suggesting is that actually we're doing the same thing with science, right? That when we're using science, that's still dependent on the ways in which we value certain notions, the ways in which we value the scientific method, that still stands dependent. It doesn't mean that from that don't emerge universal objective facts, because it's not just about the stance. It's about what the stance is relating to and where the stance emerges. My contention is not with the idea that the stances are present. right? That's not the issue there. The issue is that the stance isn't what it's reduced to, right? So here's another question.
No, I'm not saying that. Okay, sorry, go
on. Do you agree that one way to talk about truth is to talk about the phenomena that is actualized in the world?
One way to... I never heard of that. Like a correspondence theory of truth, or...
No, I'm just saying that one way to talk about truth is to talk about the phenomena that is actualized in the world.
If you don't mean a correspondence theory of truth, then no, I don't know what you mean.
So, okay, let me ask you this way. What reason do you have to say that the moral sphere wouldn't be included in that same approach, in just simply to talk about phenomena in a way that's universal, not just arbitrary?
Are you asking why I think the moral conversation can't just reduce down to pure descriptive facts?
No, I'm saying that what reason do you have to say that the moral sphere wouldn't be included in an approach that looks at truth in a context of the phenomena that's actualized, in a way that's not merely stance-dependent or arbitrary?
Well, there's tons of reasons. I gave you, like, many different...
Nope.
Sorry. I gave you many different reasons in my opening. I gave you tons of arguments for that.
Could you... I didn't hear anything in your opening that was addressing that specific question. Would you like to repeat one of them? Because it didn't seem like that actually was dealing with my contention here.
Okay, sorry. What is your contention again? I'll pick out the argument. Give it again.
Yeah, so first of all, do you agree that the way to talk about truth, or one way to talk about truth, is about the phenomena that's actualized in the world? And if so, why do you think that the moral sphere wouldn't be included in that same approach?
Well, I think that there's an extra part of like moral conversation, which is like the normativity and motivation that you can't really get. Megs, you are distracted. That you can't really get from just pure descriptive facts. So if you're talking about the moral conversation being about true things about the world, that would assume the falsity of like non-cognitive views. But yeah, also, there isn't like an ought and normative component to it. So it's not just purely descriptive.
But I gave you the example of the ways in which oughts in my opening are absolutely reduced to descriptive words, to descriptive notions, right? Like we understand a goal, and then we understand that the ought there is describing a strategy, which is all descriptive statements about how to reach that goal. And the question becomes, is the goal arbitrary? My phenomenological perspective shows it's not arbitrary. Let me ask you a different question.
Those are hypothetical norms, though. Those are stance dependent. They're dependent on your goals. Like
well, no. I also explained why the stance there would be secondary, and that why, even in the context of stances, somebody could hold the wrong stance by virtue of other goals that would still be reducible to descriptive facts.
It would just be your highest order stance or something like that. Like Lance book deals with this.
It's not just a higher order stance. It's a goal emerging from something prior to stances. But let me ask you a different question. Under subjectivism, if someone held the stance that the Holocaust was a good thing, you would have no way to argue against them. Do you agree?
No, I don't agree.
Why is that?
Well, how you would argue against them is by appealing to certain internal facts about their psyche. Like they can hold that belief that the Holocaust was a good thing, but they might have some contradictory beliefs because they value their own well-being, and something like the Holocaust acts contrary to their own well-being, or maybe they value certain things that they didn't really fully think about in their view that contradict that belief as well. So we can have internal contradictions that we can still reason about.
Okay.
Well, in the context.
With that, we do have to stop there. Mob, you're going to get your 5 minutes next. And I can start your timer whenever you say your first word.
Okay. I also just want to be clear. I'm not like committing to subjectivism in this view. But let me ask you a couple of questions. Okay. So, I guess, do you disagree with any of like the premises and any of the arguments I gave? My opening?
Yeah, there was a few that I heard that I'm trying to remember especially what you said. One way in which I disagree is that you're making this distinction between normativity and facts of the matter. And I attempt to show in my opening that distinction is illusory. So that one was the ways in which I disagree with you. I also think that your approach to saying that ultimately it reduces to stances is false. that senses are also included in my view. But what I'm saying is that my moral realist views accounts for stances, but doesn't reduce moral facts just to stances. In fact, it can explain where some of the stances emerge from.
I don't get it though, because if you're having hypothetical norms in your view that are true, and like the antecedent is like some aim, some goal, how is that truth not stance dependent?
Because the goal is emerging from something that exists prior to a stance. It's emerging from... Oh, of course it does. It's actually the point. Right?
Okay, let me ask you this.
But just real quick, for the judges. I mean, this is
I'll let you.
It absolutely matters, right? This is the key. I think confusion on this point is that it matters that there is something prior to the stance that is more fundamental than the stance, because that's the distinction between the realist and the anti-realist. You can't say it doesn't matter because it absolutely does.
Okay. So let me ask you this: in this phenomenological account of moral realism, we have good and bad experiences, but we also have good and bad gastronomic experiences, aesthetic experiences, more. If phenomenology gives us stance-independent reasons, then cravings for certain food and hunger gives us stance-independent reasons, and music cravings would give us music taste realism. How do you avoid the problem of gastronomic realism, aesthetic realism, humor realism, music taste realism, and scent realism being true, since these things are obviously like absurd?
Oh no, it's not. Well, I don't see what's absurd. It's not a problem at all, right? It's simply applying these words in different categories, right?
Do you agree that gastronomic realism is true?
Well, can you define more specifically what you mean by that?
Yeah, that there are like objectively good foods, good tasting foods, or aesthetic realism, that there are objectively beautiful things, because these all have to do with our phenomenological experience.
Yeah, I'm agnostic as to some of that. I think a case could be made.
I take that as a crazy reductio. Judges make note of that. Thank you.
Well, I can explain why I think that, and I'll tell you why. Because I think that there could be facts we could learn about our phenomenology that might lead us to have the senses that we have. Why is it that we prefer certain paintings over other ones? Right? It may be that something about the configuration of the visual and the way in which our consciousness is structured may have that kind of connection there, or why it is that we prefer certain foods over other ones. There may even be evolutionary explanations as to why certain foods taste good as opposed to certain poisons. Now, again, this is not the topic of the conversation. We're talking about moral truths, which is its own category. But I'm open-minded to that applying to other categories.
Aesthetic realism as well, which is part of our experience.
Well, whether or not that... Well, again, I'm not saying that all experiences lead to the same kind of categories or judgments. Right? I'm open to that idea. I don't think there's any reason to view that as absurd. But that's a different topic. I mean,
most philosophers reject those. It's sort of like I'm doing like a reverse companions and guilt argument on you. Like
no, but I think you're comparing apples and oranges. I'm not saying that.
I reclaim that. Most philosophers agree that those things are just obviously a products of our stances, our psychology, right? Like you're right, we have evolutionary explanations for that, which influence our psychological parts, which influence our stances, and that's really what it is, our stances.
Well, what source do you have?
Let me ask you this question as well. Moral naturalism doesn't seem to tell us how to act. When we grant that what's good is identical to certain like natural states of affairs, what does that even mean? Like you say, you want reducing harm is some like normative implication of these phenomenological states or something like that.
Yes.
But it seems like you could know all the natural facts and still debate about whether deontology is true, whether this negative utilitarian view is true like you have. So there clearly seems to be a distinction between how we ought to act and these natural facts. How do you deal with that? This has to also do with like the open questions argument. Like we can know all the natural facts and still disagree about what ought. Okay.
No, well, I'm rejecting the premise. I'm saying that it's actually not the case that you could do that. That actually, in understanding all the natural facts, then that will lead us to understanding what is meant categorically by the moral ought, by the moral goal, and the way in which I gave you examples earlier about the kinds of goals that we might have. When we understand the goal, we understand the strategy to follow to achieve the goal.
That's time, guys. That's time. Gotcha. All right, Coco. Whose turn?
None of that counted. It was off your time.
That was Mob. So now Ceasetoknow.
Yeah. So we're going into our third round of cross-examination. Ceasetoknow, you're going to get 5 minutes. So it starts whenever you say your first word.
Yeah. Well, one question I have is: you said that most philosophers agree that that somehow it's absurd to hold to these other views about experience. Well, could you provide me a source that states that that's the case? Because that's not what I've seen.
Do you want me to, I don't have a source like on hand, if that's
okay.
fair.
Let me ask you a different question then. Philosophers like Hilary Putnam have challenged the fundamental dichotomy between facts and values. Hilary Putnam argued that scientific and ethical reasoning are intertwined, that many of our facts about the world already contain an evaluative component. How would you respond to Putnam's perspective that the scientific domain, and even the domain of philosophy ultimately, which we believe to be independent of mere values, that wouldn't actually exist without values?
I don't understand the argument. What is she saying? These things we're empirically observing wouldn't exist without values?
What he's saying is that when we engage in science and philosophy, we are already engaging in a domain of values in relation to facts, right? And so this distinction, valuing, for example, ethical virtues or valuing epistemic virtues, right? Valuing the scientific method, valuing logic that we would need to even have this conversation, right?
Yeah.
All these things, right, are emerging from the goals and recognitions that we have that are not just stance dependent, but are dependent from the reality that emerges from even engaging in the world, right? So how do you deal with that perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think almost every view, well, not almost every view, but a lot of anti-realist views are compatible with that. Like,
they're not compatible.
But how? Like under like a quasi-realist view. Actually, I'll under like a subjectivist view, we can still say that there are values, and these values index to our stances, and these stances relate to the facts that we're observing about the world. What's the contradiction in that?
No, but the problem there, one is that, again, you're diminishing to your stances, where we're saying that there's something deeper than stances, but also you're acknowledging here that even through a context where stances are present, objective facts can still be learned, right? Through the methodology of science, although we have certain stances about the value of the scientific method, there are facts that emerge that are not just about the stance. They're facts that emerge about the reality that is independent of the stance. I'm saying the same thing about morality, that yes, stances exist in the conversation, but they're not the foundation of both the moral fact and of the conversation.
I guess I don't really understand the argument, to be honest. I'm not like clear on the inference you're making. Like, does she have like a formal argument where I can see the inference clearly, or?
Well, simply, I'm trying to show that that your view is ultimately self-defeating. That you're saying that there's this distinction between facts and stances, and in reality, you can have stances that are in relation to facts.
Yeah,
but the stances are not what's fundamental.
Of course, they have relations. Yeah, you can have stances related to facts. Why do you think I'm?
No, but what I'm saying is that for you to show that moral realism is false, right? You have to show that the stance is what's fundamental, and that the moral facts cannot exist independent of the stances. Well, I'm showing that even if somebody has a desire, they might have a desire that's incompatible with a desire they would otherwise have if they knew all the facts of the matter that are themselves independent of the desire. So I'm saying that your responses are actually not defeating my view at all.
Do you think I'm saying, I'm still sort of confused. I'm trying to clarify. Do you think I'm saying that like descriptive facts about the world can't like influence desires and stances?
Well, it sounds like what you're saying to me is that...
Well, I just need a yes or no to that.
Okay, say it again.
Do you think I'm saying that descriptive facts about the world can't influence, or they have no relation to stances?
No, I'm not saying you're saying it has a relation, but I think you're saying that the relation is what I'm describing as an incorrect relation.
An incorrect relation?
Yes.
What is that?
What do you mean, what is it? I'm saying that your attempt to undermine my moral realist perspective is out of a confusion about how stances relate to my more realist perspective.
Okay, we'll stop right there. Mob, you're going to get 5 minutes, and then that's going to conclude 3 rounds of cross-examination, and then we're going to move on to the closers. So, Mob, your 5 minutes starts whenever you say your first word. Whenever you're ready.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I was looking. Okay. I guess I'll run. Let me ask you this question. If you say, like, you think good is analytically identical to natural properties, right? Like the term good.
I think the term good can be used in 2 different ways. One can be used to describe the experience itself, and it can be used to describe the action in terms of whether or not the action leads to that state or otherwise.
Like the way you bridge the is-ought problem is by saying the oughts are identical to the descriptive facts, right?
The way you can bridge it is to show that the oughts are still existing in a context of facts, in a context of strategies in relation to goals.
The is-ought problem is a formal issue. If you formally write some sort of argument, you have premises and a conclusion. If ought doesn't appear in the premises, then it can't appear in the conclusion, right? But if your premise is full of descriptive facts, then you don't have an ought in the conclusion. How do you solve that problem?
No, what I'm saying to you is that that's a confusion of language, right? That it's a confusion of language that would only be true if logical positivism was true. And what I'm saying to you is that actually that perspective ends up being self-defeating. How
does saying that arguments need to be valid assume logical positivism?
Right. So what I'm saying is that when we're talking about oughts, right, we're talking about goals, and goals are going to reduce to facts and strategies to achieve those goals. And the context that explains why logical positivism has failed is because its essential tenet, which is called the verification principle, is self-defeating. Right? How do you verify the statement of that verification principle? Right? Because it could not be empirically verified or logically.
The oughts reduced to descriptive facts. Are you saying they are derived from the descriptive facts, or they're identical to them?
I'm saying that oughts are derived from the descriptive facts in the sense that they are describing the strategies required to achieve certain goals, and in every part of that statement, we are talking about is statements.
Okay, so they do that. So then you agree in an argument that if X is in your conclusion, but X is not in any of the premises, then it's formally invalid. The conclusion doesn't follow from the premises, right?
But that's not what I'm doing.
No, I'm just asking. You agree with that, right?
Say it again?
If X is not in the premises of an argument, then it can't be in the conclusion because the conclusion would not follow from the premises.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay, so unless you have some like fundamental oughts there in the premises, then you can't get it in the conclusion of the argument, right? So do you have fundamental oughts?
Yeah. I'm not saying... So I agree with you that when we talk about morals, we're saying if you have this goal, then this is how we achieve that goal. And the question there is the if, right? But what I'm saying is that the if that then leads to that goal is not arbitrary. It's not merely a product of culture or stances or opinions, but rather emerges from the phenomenology I discussed.
Okay.
So nothing about what I said there is invalid. I recognize that, yes, you have to have the if statement prior to or in front of the proposition.
Yeah. I do feel like your view falls into the trivial part of the Lance Bush trichotomy. It's not really formative. But I got 1 minute left. Let me go with the EDA. So you agree that if evolution selects for beliefs that aid survival and the beliefs shaped by evolution are not aimed at moral truths, then our faculties are unlikely to track moral facts, right?
Sorry, you were cutting out. Could you say it again?
Like evolution's geared towards survival, not moral facts, right?
Sure. I mean,
Okay, wait,
think,
you said sure, you agreed. Okay, so
well,
this seems to
well,
agree.
I mean, let
I
me
reclaim my time. I reclaim my time.
Okay,
So
but let me
you said
answer
sure,
your question accurately.
and
I think it depends. I think there's ways in which both can be true. I think there are evolutionary benefits to certain moral principles, but my view is not grounded in mere survival or evolution. So it's not.
No,
really
I know yours isn't. That's the problem. Because if evolution guided us towards survival, then we wouldn't have any reason to trust that our faculties are geared towards knowing what these moral facts are.
Okay, we're gonna have to cut it there. Now we're going to go into like closing statements. Thank you guys for your candor. That was 3 rounds of cross-examination. So both of you guys are going to get 3 minutes, and Ceasetoknow, your 3 minutes will start whenever you say your first word.
Yeah, so I wanted to, a mob earlier asked me for a formal argument, so I wanted to provide him with one in my closing statement. Premise 1, the statement killing a defenseless person is wrong expresses a proposition that is reducible to a state of phenomenology. Premise 2, the proposition killing a defenseless person is wrong is true. Premise 3, the proposition is true because there exists an objective, stance-independent fact about the phenomenology of killing that person. So I wanted to provide that formal argument, but I wanted to address some of the confusion here. I think the problem with this conversation is that it's not really my position that the mob was addressing. Right? It's not really my position that he was taking issue with. Right? I'm not claiming that stances aren't a part of the conversation. What I'm claiming is that these moral facts are reducing to something that's not just the mere stance, not just the mere culture or opinion, but rather what I called earlier the nature of the experience, right? And that when we're using words like ought, we're describing particular goals. And in the context of moral discourse, we're talking about the goal of reducing harm. And so this is not any linguistically different than if somebody said, well, I don't have the goal of being healthy, so I'm just going to drink poison, that we could still call that person healthy when they were drinking that poison, right? It would simply be, like Mob said, trivially true that they would not fit that category. But this doesn't mean that it's not informative, right? I'm still grounding where moral notions are emerging from, right? I'm grounding the relationship between facts and values, which always exist in a different way than what Mob was describing in this conversation. And so this is, I think my view is absolutely informative. And it's not just expressing something that's trivial. It's grounding where these notions emerge from. And that when we're talking about morality, we're talking about something that extends beyond mere taste, that people don't treat moral discourse and disagreement as a mere difference in taste. So non-subjectivist views fail to really navigate the intuitions we have about the ways in which these words are used, because they reduce moral facts to just statements of culture and taste and things of that nature, whereas I'm providing a context in which the moral facts are discovered by examining the nature of the mind, right? The nature of the mind, and understanding the ways in which oughts are discussed when talking about goals in this context, the goal of harm reduction.
I'll finish your last sentence.
Yeah, the last sentence is going to be this. Thank you for letting me have this debate. And again, I think that for moral realism to fail, logical positivism would have to be true. And I think that history and philosophy has already shown that logical positivism has failed because it couldn't justify its own central tenet, and therefore showing that values are always present when talking about facts.
Okay. With that concludes Ceasetoknow's final statement. Thank you for your statements. We appreciate you. Now, Mob, you're going to get 3 minutes for your closing statement. and I'll allow you to finish your last sentence. But yeah, it starts whenever you say your first word.
Okay. That was actually really fun. This is like my first long conversation about moral realism, so I hope the crowd enjoyed it. But I just want you guys to notice something very interesting. Cease waited till the last minute to give a formal argument. Maybe it's because he's terrified of my response to, I don't know. That seems pretty reasonable to me. But Cease did admit initially that I'm more likely to be correct, that I started off winning the debate. And I also, upon questioning, I don't believe Cease bridged the is-ought gap. I don't think he showed how you can derive oughts from descriptive propositions, especially in the context of an argument. You know, how inferences lead from propositions to other propositions. And I think also he references his reference to like hypothetical norms that are indexed to goals, and those are indexed to goals and stances. They have them in the antecedent of the hypothetical norms. So I don't know how he can get around. I don't feel like he got around that pretty well. Because I agree with Lance when he was debating Michael Brown, that the Kantian constructivist views are not realist views. But okay, that's a side point. Hold on. And in the end, he admitted his view, like at the last, just before the closing statements, he admitted that his view is not based on survival, which means that Sharon Street's evolutionary debunking argument works against him. He can't reasonably believe that moral realism is true if his own faculties are evolved to be truth tracking not evolved to be truth tracking with respect to his own moral framework. So at the end there, he actually conceded that it's irrational to believe his own metaethical framework. He also, I had more arguments in my opening he didn't address. He didn't address my queerness argument at all. He didn't touch it. He also didn't address my open question argument at all. So I don't think he succeeded. I don't think he demonstrated the falsity of many views like quasi-realism, like error theory. Those weren't even touched. He still had like a ton more work to do to demonstrate that realism is true, which I get it's hard to do in an hour-long debate, but those weren't even touched. So as far as his burden of proof is concerned, yeah, he did not meet it. And that'll be the end of my closing.
Okay. With that, that's going to conclude the debate. Thank you both, Mob and Ceasetoknow, for your statements. I just found out I was using a certain word wrong, facepalm. Judges, how are we looking?
Can I say something that this will be not something that the judges judge on, but just for the audience listening?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so
I want to say something.
Yeah, so there's a reason why I didn't address those views, because they didn't actually relate to my position. So I didn't feel any need to address those views because they were not relevant to my framework. So
Judges, you cannot include this in your...
No, I said, yeah, you don't need to include it, but I wanted everybody to just hear that because, I wasn't trying to avoid it, it just wasn't relevant.
Okay. Mob, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to say, Cease is adding that on now because he didn't actually have responses to them. And Cease, go back on mute. My turn. And yeah, that's just looks really bad on him. Looks really, really bad. I think judges should consider that.
Okay, guys. I hope you guys could stay friends after this.
No, I actually, this was really, I love being able to debate somebody that I actually like. I think it's fun. One of the first times I've actually gotten the chance to do that. So, I'm happy with it.
Okay. And judges, do you guys need time? We can do audience comments, questions, critiques, and concerns, or you guys good to go?
I'm good whenever. If we stay consistent, I guess. We did questions first last time, so it's up to you.
Yeah, I'm good whenever.
Yeah, it gives time for the judges to write down what they can write down, gather their thoughts.
Stephen, how do you feel? Are you do you need more time or? But yeah,
I think as good as
As
I
long
can.
as one person needs no more time, we should just give them the time.
I think I'm fine.
But
Yeah.
okay, but I would think I guess we could either stay consistent and allow people up, or we can let them go. What do you want to do?
Yeah, whatever you guys want to do. But yeah, I just think maybe the audience could just ask questions.
Yeah, let's do audience questions, comments, and concerns, and then we'll put the poll up, and then we'll get to the judges' vote. So, Cage, your first step. What you got to say?
I just had a question for Mob. Given how false your position is, how difficult was it to win this debate tonight?
Was that for me?
Mob?
Sorry, what's the question?
Jesus Christ. Given how false your position is, how difficult was it for you to win this debate tonight?
You're saying I won?
Can you heard? Okay, whatever.
The only thing I heard, buddy.
All right. Any other questions? It sounds like there's no more questions.
But to answer, I think Cease is a very, very smart person, and I just learned about this stuff recently, so it was challenging.
Yo, I got funny, bro. We got another person coming up. All right.
Fredo, what up? Comments, questions, critiques, or concerns? What you got for us?
Yeah, I've got a question for Cease. Do you think you actually answered?
What?
What's your question, Fredo? I think you cut out.
Sorry. Do you think that you answered the question of is the goal the ought of a goal objective or subjective?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I clarified the relationship between facts and values, what we mean by goals, the ways in which senses relate to these concepts. I think I showed a foundation in which we can talk about facts and grounded in phenomenology in a way that saves a notion of moral realism. And like I said, I think a lot of the other views I didn't need to address them because it didn't address my position.
Yeah, but the you said an ought is a goal. How can we prove what the goal, whether the goal is an agreeable ought?
I didn't say a goal. I didn't say that an ought is a goal. I said the oughts are the words we use to talk about the strategies to achieve those goals. And then the question becomes, where do those goals emerge from? Are they arbitrary? Are they stance-dependent opinions just emerging from culture? Or do they emerge from the nature of our experience, which is not going to be cultural or just a matter of arbitrariness, which is what would be required for more realism of the kind I described to fail as a position. Mm-hmm. So I think ultimately there were just confusion here as to the ways in which these concepts relate to each other.
Okay, and with that, the next debate does start at 8:10, so we might want to get to those judges' votes pretty soon, because it's like 8:03 right now, so we got 7 minutes to like crack this egg and make an omelet. So, Fredo, I hope that was good enough. And judges, now we can get on to your decisions.
Or I'll just pocket the second first and go first again. And because we don't have that long, 7 minutes, I'll be quicker than last time. Both well done again. I think this debate, I don't know, maybe structure was lacking compared to the other debates of the tournament so far, which I didn't really expect from either of you. I thought there would be overall, a lot more structure and I guess pointedness towards your questions and rebuttals. Given that, your opening statements were great. Both of you did really well. I give it to Cease overall. In terms of argumentation, there was a clear grounding in the phenomenology of consciousness, its structure. There was analogies like bodybuilding, poisons, whatnot, and some attempt at a syllogism, although kind of unclear. In the clash, I think Cease was stronger, more direct. The jokes, I think, were great, Mob. I think if you were winning the debate, you would have had time to give those jokes. I think they did impact because your line of questioning wasn't that strong. You Cease, I think you just, in some cases, you just denied, that the open question argument was a point. You turned a lot to the kind of truth, or the value ladenness of like epistemic truths or scientific truths. So kind of, you offer this like a companions in guilt style argument where the normativity of our other functions in life kind of infer that we do use normativity, and so that there is this kind of realist sense. I do think Mob addressed that pretty well, but I don't know. We're running out of time, I guess. So yeah. I think well argued. It was really, really close. It was I scored 34 to 36. So Cease, you took it by like a fraction. Yeah, I'll finish it.
Yeah, I thought that was good and really close as well. As I'm speaking now, I actually haven't decided, so I'll just go through some points and hopefully come to a decision by the end. The opening statements were good. I'm a little bit unclear, and we could maybe talk about this after, about the exact details of Cease's position, because I initially thought, okay, it's just a sort of analytic naturalism, where something like the good actions are just those which produce harm, or something along those lines, and that's just what it means to be a good action. But then it later became something about the good being that which is conducive to certain goals, but it's still objective because those goals are grounded in further or basic facts about phenomenology or psychology or something like that. Maybe I'm misunderstanding the position, but that seems like a different view, which I actually don't think is a realist view. But regardless, that wasn't something that was really addressed in too much detail in the discussion, so I can't really judge too much on that. Some of the things that came up, I'll try to be quick. The point about priors, I'm not sure how significant of a point that is. I think Bob was sort of technically correct that there's more theses that you have to reject, you have to accept as a realist, and really just at least one of them has to be false for the realism to be false. So in that sense, it's there's an argument to be made there's an antecedent more probable. But I think it's a fairly minor point. And then, some of the arguments that were brought up I thought weren't pertinent, as Cease has mentioned, to at least Cease's view. The queerness argument, I don't think that's relevant, since I don't think he was positing his queer moral properties, especially if it's an analytic naturalist view. Although open question argument, I think that should have been explored further. I'm not convinced that a compelling response was given. A lot of focus was put on the Hume's Izzat gap and the fact-value distinction. I thought this is where Cease did pretty well. I thought there's ways to push back again that weren't really discussed. The quick leap from the fact-value distinction to a sort of logical positivism I thought was a bit strange, but again, it wasn't really addressed or discussed. So that would probably be a point for Cease there. He gave an argument at the end in his closing, which is kind of a standard realist argument. Just that, it seems like this is something that's true, and like it's not sense dependent, and so on, and it's a moral truth. Would have liked that earlier in the discussion, so that could be a target of the of the debate, but regardless, it's still something that contributes to skies. So overall, yeah, very close. You really should have known that Hillary Putnam was a man, but whatever. No one's going to comment on that. I would want to give this as a draw, but I'll give it very slightly to Mob. I'll give it very slightly to Mob, but it really could have gone either way.
No pressure. No pressure.
Either Mitch or Steven?
Mitch, you already went, right?
Yeah, I already gave mine.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, Steve. Yeah, true. Yeah, Steven's your turn.
So for the opening, I gave it to Cease. I think he's very clear, concise. I understood his position, at least from what he stated. Mob, I think you felt like a lot of information was kind of thrown at me. That could be my inability to track, but you had a lot of content that I think maybe if you could have made it a bit more concise or saved some of the arguments for like the cross-examination, maybe that would have helped. But I felt like I had some difficulty tracking because there were several like arguments that I'll probably look at later to make sure I'm actually understanding them. But Cease, you brought up some of the classic topics like the Izhok gap. Let's see here. Mob, you had a lot of rhetoric, which I wasn't sure what to think about it, whether I should. I just tried to be neutral as I could. But ultimately, I gave the opening to Cease. The cross-examination.